Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, co-author of the Parable Port series, and today we are talking about The BUG Bandits by Jenni L. Walsh. Now this is a book that was put out by Zonderkidz, and I was really excited to read this one. It was actually on my list of books I wanted to read this year in 2025. It came out in May, and I finally got a copy of it from my local library, and so I was super excited to finally get to read it. And I gotta say, this was such a fun book to read. Let me give you the pitch. The log line, or like the kind of 2-second version of this book is Home Alone meets Night at the Museum. And it was so fun. I loved it so much. You have great characters, a great plot, an absolutely incredible setting, and such a well-written story. So let's get into this. So Liberty is a girl who lives in an insectarium. I think that's how you say it. If you don't know what an insectarium is, I did not know either until I read this book. And then I wanted to go to one, and I wanted to find one so badly because I thought, that sounds so awesome. Basically, an insectarium is a place that is like a museum for bugs and insects and arachnids and any sort of creepy crawly thing you can think of. They live in this insectarium and is open to the public. People can come see the butterflies and the spiders, and there's even some snakes and reptiles and different things too. There's an iguana that walks around in the butterfly habitat too. That's amazing. There are just so many amazing creatures in this insectarium, and it's an incredible place. Liberty actually lives there. It's like 4 stories, and Liberty and her dad live on the top story of the building. We don't ever know anything about a mom. There's no mom mentioned, and there's nothing mentioned about like why the mom is not in the storyline, so that's not a part of the story at all. But we focus on Liberty first and foremost, who is known as the bug girl at school, and so she's always kind of like felt really self-conscious about that. And then one day, one of the most popular kids in school, Cam, is hired to help at the insectarium, and Liberty's freaking out because she's thinking, no, that's like one of the most popular kids in school. I don't want him to know where I live and know all about this insectarium that I live at. Like, I just don't want this. But soon they become friends, and they become friends who have to foil some kind of a buglery that is coming soon, and they do call it a buglery throughout the book. So I'm not just saying that just for fun. It's actually in the book as the buglery, a burglary. Someone is going to try and steal something, and it's up to Liberty and Cam to figure it out and save the day and find out who is behind it and what is going on. And so this book turns into this great Home Alone kind of story with like a little bit of Night at the Museum, with so many like hijinks and pranks and fun things going on, and a great mystery up to the very end. So I thought it was just so much fun what Jenni Walsh was doing in this book. She's come up with, I think, one of the most unique settings that I have ever heard of. I did not really know there were like just bug museums. Like, I know that there's places in like zoos that often have like a bug habitat or things like that you could go into and see all the different bugs and creatures and things, but I never thought about a whole museum dedicated to bugs. And so this one is just, it's full of amazing things. One of the best parts of the book is when Liberty is giving Cam the tour of all of the places in this insectarium. And it's so fun because you as the reader, it's kind of like the setup that's done often in films where you're setting up things that something's going to happen there later and something's happening there later, and I can't wait to see what happens there. Kind of like Home Alone has done this before, where it kind of like shows you different places earlier on and points them out, and then Kevin uses those locations or different things as part of his traps for when the burglars do arrive. And Liberty and Cam do the same sort of thing. So we have this setup for all these different places that are going on, and it was so much fun. Now, Liberty has a best friend who's moved away, and they chat on video often, which I thought was a really interesting angle to add to this story, because it's not something that's super typical that you see in a lot of books where, it's this friend who has moved away. And usually in older books, when a friend moves away, they are gone. Like, they They can't really write to each other very easily. It's not easy to talk on the phone because of long distances, things like that. But nowadays, with social media and video calling, like, you can keep up with people a lot more easily when they live far away. And so Liberty is keeping her best friend every day. They have this phone call at 5 o'clock. And so it's just a great piece of, oh, that phone call at 5 o'clock is going to come into play somewhere. It was just so expertly put together that way. Jenni Walsh did such a good job with this, like kind of setting all the pieces together, putting it all on the board, and then getting it going. I will say, I was kind of hoping that the burglary would happen a little sooner than it did in the book. It kind of happens in the last third of the book. And the rest of the book is build up. There's solving mystery pieces, trying to figure out what's going on ahead of time, coming up with the plans. And then in that last third of the book is really where things just go up a notch. I think this book, you have such a great setting, and Liberty is such a strong character. It's told from Liberty's point of view throughout the whole book, and she is such a strong character and has such a way of just expressing her thoughts that are really interesting. And she also is so obsessed with insects and bugs, and that comes out in all the ways she interacts with people. And I really loved that attention to detail, because another writer could have taken this and just made it Liberty's a girl living in an insectarium, yay, and then that's a small tiny thing. But for her, bugs are a huge part of her world and a huge part of her life. So she has a lot of analogies. She talks about bugs a lot. She looks at bugs as this just amazing part of the world that she is so fascinated by, and hopes that other people would be fascinated by it too. You have some great also just character growth for Liberty throughout the book, and for Cam too. Cam kind of becomes a lead supporting character in this book, and you have some great moments for him. He has some very interesting things going on with his character that are, on one hand, really typical. You could be I've seen this movie on Disney Channel before with this kind of character growth. But then there are other aspects to his character that I really thought were interesting. And I thought, oh, that's kind of different. I have not really seen another author do that much with that character. So that was a fun thing to see throughout the rest of the book. One interesting thing that I was not anticipating, and it's kind of an interesting thing because it was something that wasn't here that I was anticipating to be here, but it wasn't. So Zonderkidz is actually a Christian publisher, and Zondervan is the kind of parent company for Zonderkidz. Zondervan is owned by HarperCollins, and so it's an interesting thing because Zondervan used to be an independent Christian publisher, and they put out a lot of different Christian fiction for kids all throughout the years. They put out a lot of adult Christian fiction as well under the Zondervan title, but under Zonderkidz, they've put out a lot of Christian fiction throughout the years. Well, when they were bought by HarperCollins, I was curious what would happen with the brand of Zonderkidz, if they would continue doing the same sorts of things or if they would change it up. And I think what's interesting about this book is in this book, there is no mention of God, Jesus, the Bible, church, nothing like that. This book does not even really acknowledge that, but this book is very clean. There's nothing in it that I would say, ooh, that could be maybe a parent might have an issue with that if their kid read it, sort of stuff. It's all very clean. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. This is a middle grade book, and middle grade books do tend to be on the clean side, but some of them have, references to different sorts of potty humor or even some swear words here and there sometimes. But this one had none of that. And I thought it was kind of interesting that while this book did not have any sort of overt Christian message or storyline or anything like that, it did have a clean aspect to it. And I thought it was kind of interesting because I was anticipating, since this was from Zonderkidz, that it would have some sort of, Christian message going on, that kind of a thing, which I've talked about before on this channel. A Christian book, it's a very difficult thing to define because kind of people have different definitions of it. People have different ways of talking about Christian fiction in general. And so for me, I always think of Christian fiction as, number one, does it come from a Christian publisher that says it's a Christian publisher? Number two, does it come from an author who says that this is a Christian book that they have written and they have decided to kind of adhere to some basic Christian beliefs and express those in the book in some way? And in this book, it just is not part of the storyline at all. I still think it's a really good book. And sometimes Christian fiction, unfortunately, can go too far in the other way when they're trying to like almost focus on giving a message instead of telling a good story. And this one is more telling a good story, and there's not exactly a message here. Even in, most middle grade fiction, there sometimes is a message. Sometimes it's kind of basic and typical. This one is probably more on the basic, typical side of things. Like kind of be excited about what you're excited about, do the things you love to do kind of stuff. Like those kind of typical messages. So this one is a very interesting one from that aspect. And since I am a children's pastor and I think about a lot of, fiction from that lens, I did want to mention it here in this review because I thought that it was just interesting to me. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. Now, this book is not a fantasy book, it's not a sci-fi book, it's not a supernatural book, it's not a horror book, it's none of those things. This is just a straight up fun action-adventure kind of story, and really, Home Alone meets Night at the Museum is the best way I can describe it. The Night at the Museum piece, it doesn't have like the fantasy aspects that those films did, but this more is on the side of, we're exploring a museum, we're in the museum, this almost all takes place there, and then you also have that Home Alone aspect, which I thought made it so fun and interesting and different from other books that I've read in the genre. So overall, I would definitely give The Bug Bandits a solid 4.5 out of 5. I think it was a tiny bit slow at the very beginning, and like I said, I wanted it to get to the buglery a little faster than it did, but overall, this was so fun. I enjoyed this book so much. I think it's a fun read. If you like Home Alone, if you like Night at the Museum, if you like action adventure kind of stories where there's like a burglary and they gotta stop the burglary kind of thing, this is your book. I will say too, I didn't mention this earlier, but I don't always love it when kids' books have like a burglary or some kind of a thing going on and the villains are just bumbling oafs. I get really annoyed with that trope. I think it's very annoying because I really don't feel like it's real life in the way that most people who perpetrate crimes like that act. I mean, sometimes sure, but I think on the whole, that's not how it comes across. So I was just like, oh, I hope they don't have bumbling oaf kind of burglars going on here. And they did not. These burglars were smart. They were thinking it through. There was a plan in place and maybe even a little bit ahead of Cam and Liberty, which was fun. So I really enjoyed this. Definitely some good twists here too. So I think you're really going to enjoy this one. If you like action adventure, you like fun books that are just like a great storyline with such a unique setting. I said this before recently too, but I think if you're a writer and you're looking for books to read that have just excellent settings to give you good ideas about how to set a scene, this book is a book to read for that. I think that Jenni Walsh does such an amazing job setting the scene, getting us into this world, and then helping us experience it. Like I said, I wanted to go to an insectarium after this book was done. I read this also in pretty much one sitting straight through. I had so much fun with it. So, until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.